Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll give it a minute to let a few more people trickle in, and then we will get started. All right, we are a minute past the hour. I see the participation number still trickling up, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 2026-27 May revision webinar, where we are going to provide you some key updates on the governor's budget plan for the next fiscal year. Just a few reminders before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards, a copy of the slides will be sent out to all attendees. Finally, if you have questions, please direct them to the Q&A, not the chat. We are going to only be monitoring the Q&A portion of the webinar today. So we're going to get started with introductions with our panelists. I am Sara Pietrowski, CASBO's Chief Governmental Relations Officer, and I'm excited to be with you here today.
Good morning. I'm Laura Lilley. I am the Director of Fiscal at San Juan Unified and the Chair of the CASBO Ledge Committee.
Good morning, Darrin Waters, Deputy Superintendent Business Services in Hemet Unified in Riverside County, and I am the Vice Chair of this CASBO's Legislative Committee.
All right. So just a little bit of background. Last Thursday, Governor Newsom released the 2026-27 May revision, which is a key update to his state budget proposal for next fiscal year. He started the presentation with some framing remarks about the economic health, as he sees it, of California, and some of the threats to our economy that we are facing because of changes at the federal level. He had a fairly optimistic presentation, which was grounded in the really robust revenues that California continues to see over these past few months following the April 15th tax deadline. If you listen to economic news, much of this is being attributed to the health of the AI sector and a lot of stock benefits that is all having for the state and the citizens of California. So we are $16.5 billion above the projected revenue from governor's budget. He did also stress that while these revenues are coming in at a much higher level than expected, there is an attention to prudent fiscal outlooks and making sure that structural deficits in future years are attended to. So we just want to touch on why this all matters before we get into the specifics of the May revision. And this is one of the most important pieces in the development of the state budget for next year. In January, when the governor puts out his proposal, everything it was based on guesses, very good guesses, but guesses about what revenues were going to look like. And so when the May revision is released, it really becomes crunch time because with the updated data, the fiscal outlook, economic conditions, the legislature and the governor can really begin negotiations on the final budget. It happens very, very quickly from here to June 15th, when the legislature is required to pass their budget. And then it's not always that the final budget is put in place by June 15th and voted on. Usually there's a couple days after that for the three-party deal, which is the deal between the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's administration to all come together. But they will have a budget in place for 26-27 by June 30th. This matters for us here today because now is a great time for us to both learn about what the May revision proposes and get involved in making sure that the governor's administration and the legislature are fully aware of what the proposed changes could mean for local educational agencies, both on the positive side, but also in terms of challenges as well. So we are going to be watching this very, very carefully, be participating in all the discussions. I myself sat through almost a full day of hearings in the Assembly Budget Subcommittee on Education yesterday. And after this afternoon, I will head over to the Capitol to do the same in the Senate. So we're going to be involved and share CASBO's perspectives on the May revision in the coming days. And I'll talk a little bit about next steps at the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. Let's kind of jump into some of the details of the budget, as Sara alluded to. This slide shows the changes between the governor's budget in January and what we're seeing in the May revision. We can see this is just budget year only, 26-27. We can see the total state budget's up about $1 billion. General fund budget down almost $2 billion. The total reserves also up about $7 billion, and our public school rainy day fund, you can see the difference there. It's up about over $6 billion. Most of that was mandatory, that was triggered by capital gains, but it does include a $1.6 billion discretionary contribution to that. And together, I think it's about 8.3% of Prop 98, which, why does that matter to us is that public school rainy day fund, that reserve level, if it's over 3%, that has potential to trigger our local reserve caps. So we're keeping an eye on that. Okay, now here's Prop 98 at a glance. Reminder that every time we see one of these state budgets, or at least I have to remind myself, maybe you guys all remember, but we're always looking at the prior year, the current year, and the budget year. So that's always what's included in these budget. So this one shows you, again, the difference between what we saw in January and what we're seeing now in May. Total change in all three of those years between January and May is $6.4 billion across those 3 years of the budget window. And it's actually, compared to the prior year, 25 Budget Act, it's up $28 billion. And so we've shown you that on this slide. The per pupil rates for Prop 98, that rises to a little over $21,000 per pupil. And if we look at all funding sources, we're a little over $28,000 per pupil. Kind of hidden in there in 25-26, we've still got that settle up, the maneuver, whatever we're calling it this year. We've still got that. Maybe a small silver lining is it is a little bit lower than what we saw in January, and it's $3.9 billion. So that's really the mechanism by which they're underfunding the guarantee and what's due to our districts.
One thing I'll note before we move off this slide is that in the high level frameworks that have been put out by both the Senate and the Assembly, they seem to reject the withholding of Proposition 98 funds in 25-26. So as additional details come out from the houses of the legislature, we're hopeful that there will be some unified pushback against this for the final budget.
All right, on to LCFF and the Super COLA. I haven't seen one of these in a while. The May revision proposes a 4.31 total increase or a Super COLA. The actual statutory COLA is 2.87. We knew that at the end of April when we got the numbers in. So 2.87 is the statutory COLA. The cost of that is $3.3 billion statewide. The Super COLA component jumping up the extra 1.44% is about over $906 million. If you're going to be putting this in your budget, I'm not putting the Super COLA in my budget. I'm going to be looking at doing the 287 for sure. And it's just a little bit too up in the air right now. I want to see where the legislature lands on that for right now. If you are going to put the full super COLA in your budget, be sure to put in an offsetting expense for the cost of the pregnancy leave expansion. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but you're going to want to make sure you don't spend the same dollar twice, because you put 431 in there, you're going to go to the table for that, and then you're going to have to come back and still pay for the pregnancy leave after you've already given it away at the table. So we want to be very cautious about that while that's still in there. Laura kind of alluded to this deferral payment. So for 25-26, there was a $1.9 billion payback that remains unchanged. That was in the governor's budget. So in his maneuver that he did last time, there was $1.9 billion. He did pay it. And as she alluded to, it was $5.6 billion in the governor's budget and reduced to $3.9 billion now. Obviously, Sara is right on with where the Senate and the Assembly are. When you read their documents, both of them are against that. We'll see how they wind up here over the next couple of weeks. Okay, paid pregnancy leave. It's a proposal to require us to provide up to 14 weeks of paid pregnancy disability leave. Trailer bill language is out on this, so you can go read into the details of this. The annual estimated cost is $218 million. You'll remember the super COLA was $906.7 million. $218 million of that is what they estimate for the pregnancy. Now, the cost of that program is going to be different from district to district. It's going to really depend on the demographics of your staff. Obviously, younger staff could experience a higher number than a more senior staff. I can say that because I'm in that senior staff category now. But that is the cost that they are talking about. And they are very specific in the May revise. They say this is what is to be absorbed by the super COLA, is this paid leave. We don't have all the details on how this is going to shake out just yet. There's a lot of questions about this paid leave and guardrails that we would hope would be put in place for that, but we will see how that plays out. And another thought would be, my initial concern is sure they're going to give me the extra 1.44%. But if I've got a younger staff, it could wind up costing me more than that in pregnancy leave. So I want to be very cautious personally in my district on how I'm dealing with that. Because again, I don't want to spend the same dollar twice. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity, maybe a better suggestion might be a reimbursement program so that we get what we spent versus what we didn't spend. So we'll see. Transportation has been a good example of that. Even though it's only 60%, but at least getting the true and actual cost. So we'll see if that's something that the team is at the legislature and governor, see how they negotiate through that one.
Just one note. Sorry, Darrin. I was going to say one quick thing on this in terms of thinking through the assumptions that were made and how this might apply to your specific LEA. The administration is assuming a 2% utilization rate across the state. But as Darrin notes, how that would look in each of your LEAs very much depends on your particular staff profile.
Your individual results may vary. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.
I was also going to add that I think we were a little bit surprised as we were talking through this with HR. They're like, oh, it starts July 1st. It's not a January 1st. So I think also just remembering that too, that if this is implemented as proposed, it would be right away. We got to jump in. So. Okay, so also in the May revision, we are proposing some expansion of some prior state literacy initiatives. These existing literacy grants are really geared for the very high unduplicated pupil count districts, and they were due to expire in the next 3 years. So this proposal would extend those out until 2031. Here we've broken down kind of how those numbers play out. It's pretty much close to about $450 million for these expanded literacy support investments. And that was just a precursor for the good slide that I was like, woo, I got this one. I think increased special education funding. I feel like this is just a welcome relief for all of us. So it's exciting to get to talk about this slide. In our legislative committee, special education has always been something that it's kind of been that we've always advocated for, but I feel like in the last couple of years, particularly, it's we've just been seeing the costs skyrocket, and it really hurts all districts. So seeing this increase, this is a wonderful welcome relief, and we feel like it helps everyone. So the May revise includes the 2.4 billion, as we've noted here. That equates to about a 40%, 43%, I think, increase over the prior year special ed funding. So obviously just great news. Maybe still not enough to cover how much we're all spending, but it's really some much needed relief. So you might remember back in January, the proposed rate was $999, and now we're up to that $1,340 per student. So really helps those MYPs, I think, for most of us as we put this in.
And I would add to that too, Laura. You brought up a good point earlier when we were talking that you need to take a close look at what was your contribution prior to this and what's your contribution after this. Everybody's results will be different, but does this really, is your contribution still going up even with this in there? I think it's just something to be aware of when you're looking at your numbers. Okay, discretionary block grant. This is down. It went down a little bit from the governor's budget. It was at it was at 2.8 billion, and we're at 5 billion in one-time Prop 98 funding. It is currently fully discretionary and allocated on a per ADA basis. Okay, that is what the current language has. They give you a suggested uses. I don't even look at that because it says fully discretionary. But if you've got to look at those, that's fine. But it is fully discretionary right now. You can do as you see fit with that. I do caution folks about putting this in your budget until this is final. This is the discretionary block grant is one that seems to move around a lot. We do know we've got a couple of different pushes up in Sacramento for different things. Some people don't want it discretionary. They want it more targeted on certain things. So be very cautious if you're, I personally, I'm not putting this in my budget until we find out for sure what this is. So my adopted budget won't have this in there. But if you are putting it in there, make sure you got contingency plans. Should the block grant come in less than fully discretionary, and CASBO always advocates it being based on ADA. We all have increased cost pressures. I'm a high UPP district. I would benefit greatly if they use the UPP on this, but that's not something that we believe is best for all districts. A low UPP district has the same cost pressures that I'm experiencing and increases in different things. So we really fight to keep that on an ADA level basis. And there has been some discussions in Sacramento about taking it and using your UPP component to distribute these funds. CASBO's position has always been ADA based on that. Recruiting and retention, $280 million for these residency programs. I'm going to just kind of go off script and make Sara very nervous. But this is something, if you're not looking at this, you need to really take a close look at this. Just from an anecdotal position in my district, there's a significant cost that we all incur on recruiting, hiring, training, and retaining our good teachers. These programs, we've been running it for a few years now. We've got about 100 teachers out of this program. I'm a 23,000 student district. We got about 100 teachers over the last 4 years, and out of that, we've had maybe 3 to 4 non-reelect. So it's a really good vetting. We've got some really strong teachers. So if you're not looked at this yet, be sure to take a close look at that. Now, the HR guys don't go running back saying we're jumping into this. The CBO from Hemet said that to your CBO, but there is a cost benefit I believe we've experienced here in Hemet for that. Happy to talk further about that if someone wants to.
Okay, also included in the May revision was a proposal to just continue to maintain the $1 billion Prop 98 investment, which we saw that also in January. I know we have, if these schools and this model has worked well for you, I am assuming you're quite excited to get a little bit of relief as those funds were expiring. What we are seeing new here in May is they're adding almost 500 million in reappropriated. So those unused grant dollars, they would like to reappropriate it for the uses that we see here for each of those. So be ready if you are a community school.
Right. One other small change in the May revision from governor's budget was some additional information about the proposed state government restructuring. To remind everybody, this is a proposal by Governor Newsom's administration to streamline the state level governance in California for education by moving the day-to-day oversight of the California Department of Education under an education commissioner that would be appointed by the governor. We have supported this at CASBO. We certainly do not think this is a silver bullet to address what many of you have experienced as kind of a lack of alignment from the state at times. But we think this is a step in the right direction where there'd be a clear through line from policy-making decisions to implementation support for LEAs with those policy decisions. With that clear through line, a level of accountability that we haven't seen before from the perspectives of LEAs. Right now, because the California Department of Education is led by a separate constitutional officer, sometimes the decisions at the California Department of Education haven't really been completely focused on implementation of some of the key policy changes that the governor and the legislature together pass and require for local educational agencies. So with the May revision, there are some additional details, including signaling officially that they are going to move a small portion of the budget that is currently at the California Department of Education into what would be a new office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction in future years. This is a fiscally neutral shift, so it would take some of that executive staff that's currently at the department and move it into this new office. And then the California Department of Education would continue to function, but be officially a part of the administration with that alignment and that accountability. All right, so as Laura noted at the beginning, the things we have to remind ourselves about at May revision. At May revision, there are the only things that get up that are in the documents that we see publicly are the things that have been updated. But that does not mean that there are things from governor's budget that have fallen off the radar for the final budget. So we just want to note that there are two things that we discussed in our governor's budget webinar and news break that continue to be part of the governor's proposal for 26-27, but you do not see mention of in any of the other materials. The first one is expanded learning. This is a new appropriation to guarantee a tier 2 per pupil amount of $1,800. And the other one is the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. And this is a block grant that came out of a lawsuit around COVID, and this would be the final payment of that block grant. And as with prior payments, those funds are required to be allocated based on a needs assessment and incorporated into your local control and accountability plan for that transparency.
I would also add to that too, Sarah. I think that's the final 2 years are paying off in one shot here. So we're getting a little shot in the arm for that.
Thank you, Darrin. All right, so just a little bit on next steps and what our focus is going to continue to be. Um, you see at the bottom of this slide a link to CASBO's policy platform. If you have not taken a look at that, please go and check it out. This is a document that outlines CASBO's policy priorities and really guides us, both as staff and as the legislative committee, in our decisions around budget advocacy positions, legislative advocacy positions, and is just a really nice summary of the key priorities of the organization. So, as always, we are going to continue advocating for full Proposition 98 funding. As was discussed in one of the earlier slides, we still see the governor proposing withholding of Proposition 98 at that reduced $3.9 billion for 25-26. Tomorrow, Tasha Davenport and I will be at a press conference with our colleagues in the Education Coalition. It is a point of unity for the Education Coalition, which includes our labor colleagues on the other management organizations and the state PTA. We're going to make sure that it is known that this is not acceptable to withhold this guaranteed funding. It's called the Proposition 98 guarantee for a reason. We're always going to keep a focus on preserving local control and flexibility, avoiding new mandates whenever possible, and making sure that there's attention to that operational sustainability with LEAs and not just sustainability, but operational impacts, because everything that gets added obviously is going to need to be implemented by you all, and there are things that will need to be attended to in that. And then one of our other key focuses is just making sure that we're always attending to rising cost pressures and workforce needs. And that really circles back to our position on advocating for the full Proposition 98 guarantee in 25-26. Because we know that the cost pressures are intense, and we want to make sure that every dollar that is guaranteed to the LEAs and schools in the state is fully appropriated.
If I could just add, Sarah, one of the things, just so for the people who are watching, we take it pretty seriously, and it's a very diverse group that the legislative committee is. And we have smalls and littles. We've got mid-sized districts, larger districts. We've got low UPP, high UPP, community-funded districts. We even let them come to the table and advocate as well. But everybody's voice gets heard, and this is the one committee that I've really enjoyed the most for that. And this is our kind of our North Star. These are the things that we really focus on, but we make sure that it works for all walks. We don't like to have winners and losers in different school districts and pitting us against each other. So I appreciate you, Sarah, for that leadership, and Laura, obviously, for the chair this year doing that as well.
Thanks, Darrin. I would echo that. And I think as I was reading other people as they responded to the May revise, I was appreciative, and kind of to what Sara talked about, that we're all aligned of protecting that Prop 98 funding, because I think it's overall good news, but we're still seeing that maybe that just that Prop 98 is in jeopardy. And so I think, as a focus, it is to ensure that is not, not okay going forward, and whatever we can do.
All right, so just to circle back to what's next, the legislature is required by law to pass their budget by June 15th. They are in hearings this week to discuss all of these proposals before going into floor session for the next couple of weeks. We are going to continue to be engaged. We had a legislative committee meeting on Friday where we spent the morning digesting this ourselves, shaping up CASBO's letter on the May revision that will be sent soon, attending the hearings, answering questions. Darrin got a few text messages from me yesterday with some things that came up that he took a moment to help give me his thoughts on. So this is a really busy time of year. We're all going to stay engaged. We're hosting this webinar to keep you informed. And then as things shape up, we will continue to keep you updated as new information becomes available. But most importantly, do not hesitate to reach out to us if any questions come up from you over the next couple weeks. If you know school service is going to be having their webinar soon on the May revision, other organizations that you might be a part of are going to be discussing the May revision. So we are here as a resource. Please reach out via email and we will get your questions answered or take your point of view so we can incorporate that into our advocacy efforts.
And just before we jump into answering the questions here, just on that second bullet, local advocacy is really key now. This is the time, if you have relationships with your legislature, your local folks, to take advantage of that. If you haven't contacted them before, you need to kind of build that relationship, invite them out. They're in their district typically on Fridays. So if you schedule ribbon cuttings and other celebratory things for that, they love that sort of stuff to get invited to. But start building those relationships that you have, and then when you reach out, they'll take your call, and you can provide your position as well.
All right, I'm gonna jump to some questions in the Q&A. Laura, Darrin, there's a question about cash projection, deferring cash receipt for June apportionment.
I don't believe there's been a change in that. That's still a deferral.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Any advice that you might have about discussing the Super Cola with your labor partners? And I think I always have in the back of my mind, you bargain in dollars, not in percentages. But any other wisdom that you might have for the participants about how to discuss the Super Cola?
So I'll take a shot, then Laura, if you got something to add there. Yes, you need to talk about dollars. Everybody's context is different. If you're declining enrollment, it's even more austere on what you have to talk about. So really look at your context and what it is in dollars that's going to change before you jump into percentages. It's okay to talk percentages, but you better know what the dollars are behind them and how they impact where you're at. I think using the governor's language in the May revision that says the Super Cola is to cover the pregnancy leave, I would come in with a cost analysis, what you've spent on pregnancy leaves. We're right now pulling the data for last, I think we're going 5 years to just take a look and see what that looks like. Understanding we're kind of hitting that COVID baby time. So we had a little spike here. So we'll see how that plays out. But I would go in, fortunately for me, I'm settled for next year, so I'm okay on a 2-year deal here. But I would go in armed with the cost, the governor's language on that, and then what is your local context to that COLA. Laura, I don't know if you had anything else.
No, I think that sounds like great advice. Just as much as you can explain the story and kind of where that's going. And like, I think we talked about that. It's going to look different for every district. That the 2% statewide, it might be different in my district compared to next door. And it might use up more of that additional augmentation COLA or whatever. We're calling that extra part of the COLA.
All right, here's another one for the two of you. Any guidance on the AB 602 investment for your local budget? What's the probability that the 1340 rate sticks? To answer that latter part, I will say I think there is a high likelihood that it sticks. This does seem universally supported in the legislature. And I think it is safe to bet, if I was a betting woman, that it is going to end up in the final budget. But interested to hear, Laura, Darrin, what you might think.
I would feel the same. I don't think I'd want to be the one advocating against giving special education students additional dollars. So we're feeling like it's pretty certain. I think obviously with anything, if you include it, you sort of need to understand what would happen if it doesn't work out and kind of have your backup plan. But I think I would agree.
And I would too, and I am a gambling guy, so I probably, but I am putting this in my budget. It will be part of my budget proposal to the board for their adoption going forward. We had a big study session yesterday. We talked about this, so it will be in our budget. I like Laura said, I just don't see anyone in the legislature saying, no, let's cut special ed. That's a pretty tough sell.
All right. We have a question about the discretionary block grant and whether or not this is in addition to previous amounts or not. And yes, last year, local educational agencies did receive a discretionary block grant as well. So this or that discretionary block grant you're using during this school year. So the budget proposal is for an additional discretionary block grant for 26-27 at the proposed $5 billion. Have you seen a ballpark per ADA amount for the discretionary block grant?
I have seen a few. Laura, have you seen? I've seen a few, but nothing real definitive. My back of the napkin that I used was 5 billion divided by 5.7 million students, and got to $877 or something like that. Again, I'm going to caution everybody to be very careful how you budget that because it could move. That could be a place where some of the movement happens is in that discretionary block grant, and I've seen it as high as in the I think it was $935 per ADA. It's probably a little bit more precise, but that'll be coming out shortly.
Yeah, I also saw 900, same as Darrin, same 900, and like you, Darrin, we're not including that in our budget, assuming that one feels like that's sort of an easy place if they need to go balance somewhere else to maybe take that down. Plus, it's discretionary, so I feel like that could be something where they might agree to some stuff, and that might be where our pressure point is, where they can.
I also saw that, yeah, there seems to be some different numbers. School services is saying 920, CSBA is saying 800, so we'll wait for definitive answers on that. A question about where might the withheld Prop 98 funding be appropriated if the legislature gets their way? Or just to make sure we're all clear, it's the governor who's proposing this, not the legislature. One of the reasons we're so opposed to the withholding is because the way that this would be used is that it would be spent on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget. And it's one of the reasons that the Legislative Analyst Office has really cautioned against this, because the money would still be owed back to LEAs in future years. And there's a real risk that if the money gets spent next year on the non-98 side of the budget and we have an economic downturn, it might take quite some time for schools to get that money back that they were owed. So there's a real danger there, and that uncertainty is another reason that we've been opposed. There are alternatives if the governor is worried about the budget situation. The money could be deposited as a discretionary amount into the rainy day fund. And then if it doesn't actually appear with our revenue, it could, that they could reverse that discretionary deposit in future years. Or kind of worst case scenario, you can always suspend the Proposition 98 guarantee, which is politically challenging, especially in an election year. So they do have a plan to use that money, and it's to support the non-Proposition 98 side of the budget, which is experiencing a lot of crunch right now.
And Sara, if I could add to that too, I think the other thing that I'm concerned about is losing the discretionary portion of it. And so they could put some strings on it, or portions of that would be restricted for other things. They give you that little laundry list of stuff if they decide that that's important enough that they want to make sure that they've got a dedicated funding source that you're going to use just for that. That's another place that I'd be concerned about.
Another question about the withholding. If there is success in stopping the withholding, any idea where the money would be allocated? We do not know. They are one-time dollars, and so they could be allocated into the discretionary block grant, make that larger, or I'm sure a number of people have ideas for how they would use one-time funds for various investments, but right now that's very much uncertain.
And CASBO's position has been, and the legislative committee's been, keeping it as discretionary as possible. The needs that I have in Hemet are different than the needs that Laura has up north, different than the Central Valley needs. It just, everybody's got something different. And, you know, we got some small districts that need that money because they don't have any money to replace a roof, right? And the gymnasium. So having that money unrestricted, I wouldn't use it for that because I don't need that issue. I've got another issue I need to take care of. So it's really about keeping it discretionary in my mind.
We have a couple of questions about the proposal for the paid pregnancy leave and how this interacts with other leaves. After listening to the discussion during the hearing yesterday, I'm certainly not an expert in all of these leaves, but my understanding is that this is in addition to, so this would kind of be the first bucket of leave that a teacher or a staff member would be able to take. There are still other statutory leaves that could be expended after using your sick and vacation time, but those are all differential pay leaves where the full salary is not being paid out during those times. Darrin, Laura, any other insight into how this interacts?
Yeah, I would just say be very cautious because this is in lieu of using sick leave too. So, you know, we got other pregnancy leaves and whatnot that you're spending down your sick leave. This is in addition to the sick leave, so it does not touch sick leave. And it just you need to account for that when you're planning. Going back to that super COLA and preparing to go talk to the table about that. What is the value of that, right? Because now you're going to have you could have additional absences down the road that or oh my gosh, the liability. I just drew a blank on the name of the liability that we have for compensated absences. Liabilities could go up as well.
I would agree with that, Darrin, that it seems like we aren't really sure how this will play out when it's implemented and how people will choose to use it. And maybe, you know, that's something to try to determine that now before we don't have the information. It's going to be difficult, but I like the idea of try to think of worst case of here's really how this could impact so you can make sure you budget accordingly.
All right. Any suggestions on how to use the discretionary block grant funds? Darrin, Laura, I think Darrin has said it a number of times. This really should be based on the unique needs of your LEA. We've heard a number of examples from CASBO members about how they have been using it, but do you have any interesting suggestions?
I'll just talk a little bit and then Laura can fill in the gaps here. But remember, it is one time. So if you're going to use it on things that eat, you better have a plan on how you're going to get it into your other budget here. I've used, we've had a lot of practice, right? We had a lot of that COVID money and coming up with a spending plan. And my suggestion is don't spend it all in 1 year, right? If you've got something you know is an increased cost for a while, and you can spread that money out. There will be an expenditure date on that. I didn't see that in the governor's piece, but typically it'll be buried in the trader bill when we have to have that spent by, and I'll have to look at that. But I used a lot of the one-time money, and I've used some of this money to help build fund balance, right? Even though this has a expenditure requirement, I can spend it on things I've already budgeted to allow some fund balance to build. I've got some deficit spending in the out years some structural deficit issues that I'm using it for to help bridge a little bit and help us on the solvency side more than the structural side. So there's a lot of different things if you sit down and really think about what I really worked hard with my cabinet and board about making sure I could use this to be tighten up our structural or excuse me, tighten up our budget issues. I saw somebody drop in there, OPEB is another one. If you have an unfunded OPEB liability, I happen to be fully funded there, so I wouldn't use it for that personally, but I think that's a great use of it. And figure out what you can do with this money. I mean, if you got to spend some on the program side, I get it. We all got to do that, spend a little bit, but really work with your cabinet teams to identify some things that you can help with your own budget and fiscal picture for the long term. Take advantage of while we have it. One-time money does not come all the time.
Yeah, ditto, Darrin. I was just going to say the same thing. It's one time, just don't forget that piece. And even I think for us, we're looking at some textbook adoptions that maybe were coming in higher. So that's sort of what we were looking at. But I think everything's on the table, and anything that could potentially save something that maybe you knew was coming, and this helps you relieve that pressure to the general fund. So
yeah, and the same thing, Laura. I had the textbook adoption estimate come in almost double, and so that is something we've talked about. We'll be using this money for once we figure out how much it is.
There are a couple other questions in the chat that I do not have the answers to off the top of my head, very technical questions. So we can circle back with you via email for those unanswered questions. Don't think we've forgotten about you. But for now, if there are not any other questions, we are going to go ahead and wrap up. We have one more quick reminder for you all before I turn it over to Darrin and Laura for any closing remarks. CASBO has a couple of new event calendars that make it really easy for you to bookmark and stay up to date on different things like this very webinar that you are on right now. So please take a look at those links and follow the instructions so you can always know what's going on at CASBO. But with that, Darrin, Laura, do you have any final remarks to share?
Sure. Overall, this is a good May revision, right? It's up. I think we've got to be very cautious about what's behind it, in the sense that the structural deficit at the state level isn't in a future year. It's on us now. The legislative analyst's office makes some good points and some advice to the legislature. This probably cut the structural deficit of the state in half, which is a positive thing. But we're also looking at relying on $20 billion in reserve withdrawals and postponement and deferrals of reserve deposits to make that happen. So be cautious with it. This is an election year. We typically enjoy election year budgets. For those who've been around for a while, we typically cycle election year, get a good budget. Make sure your house is in order, your fiscal house is in order before you go spending and making long-term commitments, and be ready for when that rainy day does come and somebody actually has to pay the piper on this.
yeah, I think I also read LAO's report, and I think they call it the wall of debt, and just talking about how it is a boom for the state, but we're not looking, we're not putting away money as we should, and it does seem like we should be in a better state if all these revenues are coming in. So
exactly right.
I agree, Darrin. Yeah,
exactly right, Laura. Revenues are up, but yet we're still in with deficits. Mm-hmm. That is a big red flag for anybody on the fiscal side.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. And as I mentioned, do not hesitate to reach out if any other questions come up, or you would like to share any of your perspectives on the May revision. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.